It all started with the navigation laws of 1651. They were a set of laws that regulated trade between the colonists and England. It forced the colonists to trade enumerated goods only to their mother country, which benefited England greatly. At the end of the French and Indian War, the Proclamation Line of 1763 was established, which eliminated the westward expansion of the colonists. This basically angered the colonists.
The Shuter Act was an external tax intended to raise money for the British Crown. Colonists weren't upset about the price, they were more upset on how it was enforced on them without their agreement. The Shuter Act also set up admiralty courts for anyone who was caught smuggling goods to or from any other country besides England. This was a direct violation of their right to a trial by jury. In 1765, the British Crown passed an external tax on the colonists, which upset them greatly. The British Crown taxed paper goods such as playing cards and dice. A year later, the Stamp Act was replaced by the Declaratory Act. In 1764, England passed the Currency Act, which required the colonists to pay in specie, or gold and silver, rather than their own paper money. America did not have an abundance of gold, which obviously made it very difficult for the colonists to pay for essential goods. This caused some colonists to turn to smuggling and illegal trading. If caught, their hearing would be done in favor of the British. In 1765, England passed the Quartering Act. This made the colonists very upset with England. This upset the colonists for two main reasons. One, the act required colonists to supply foreign British soldiers with food and lodging, which they had worked hard and long for. Second, the British passed this act without any representation on the colonists' part. The Quartering Act would be eventually brought back under the Intolerable Acts 9 years later.
To show their resentment towards the Stamp Act, the 13 colonies sent representatives to attend a meeting at the urging of James Otis. After years of oppression by the British Crown, the colonists felt that they had enough. At the meeting, they cried, "No taxation without representation," and they issued the Declaration of Rights and Grievances, which stated that there should be no tax imposed on the colonists without their consent. This was an essential step toward the Declaration of Independence because the colonists discovered that they had more in common than they had thought.
Propaganda played a big role in the start of the American Revolutionary War. Some posters, such as this one, "Join or Die" by Benjamin Franklin, spurred on the question of independence.
Rockingham imposed the Townshend Act, which taxed the colonists on glass, paint, oil, lead, paper, and tea. The result was the resurrection of colonial hostilities created by the Stamp Act. In response to the Townshend Act, John Dickinson wrote the Letters from a Pennsylvanian Farmer, where he stated that Parliament had no right to tax the colonists for the purpose of revenue. Ultimately, Letters from a Farmer urged united action on the part of the colonists.
Paul Revere called it the Bloody Massacre. It is also known as the Boston Massacre. It was highly exaggerated, making it one of the causes of the American Revolutionary War.
The British East India Company was close to going bankrupt, so in 1773, England passed the Tea Act, which called for a 3 cents tax on tea. Doing so would give the British East India Company a monopoly in the colonial market. Even though the tax was actually cheaper than it originally had been, the colonists felt like England had a secret agenda. This led to the boycotting of English tea by non-importation and purposely destroying British tea.
Boston Tea Party occurred as a result of the Tea Act of 1773, which was passed by Parliament to assist the troubled British East India Company. It could have been avoided if the Boston consignees rejected tea shipments. On the night of December 16, 1773, the Sons of Liberty, disguised as Indians, boarded 3 ships in the Boston harbor and threw 342 chests of tea overboard. This resulted in the passage of the punitive Coercive Acts of 1774 and pushed the two sides closer to war. Parliament, outraged by the Boston Tea Party and other flagrant acts of destruction of British property, enacted the Coercive Acts and the Quebec Act, which were collectively called the Intolerable Acts. The Coercive Acts closed the Boston harbor, revoked the Massachusetts Charter, made British officials immune to criminal prosecution in America, and restored the Quartering Act. Additionally, the Quebec Act extended the boundary of Quebec into the Ohio Valley. The Intolerable Acts greatly infuriated the colonists and caused the formation of the First Continental Congress. The First Continental Congress met in Carpenter's Hall in Philadelphia on October of 1774. All the colonies were present except Georgia. Although they convened to show a combined authority to Great Britain, their aims were not uniform at all. They agreed that the King and Parliament must understand their grievances, so they established the Suffolk Resolves, which denounced the Intolerable Acts and called for boycotting. Congress voted to meet again the following year.
On April 19, 1775, General Gage was sent to capture the local militia's arsenal at Lexington and Concord from John Hancock and Samuel Adams. When Paul Revere got word of the attack, he rode ahead shouting the famous phrase, "The Redcoats are coming, the Redcoats are coming." In the end, the Minutemen would lose at Lexington but would win at Concord after having additional time to prepare. This would be known as a shot heard around the world. The Second Continental Congress succeeded the First Continental Congress in the summer of 1775. After the battles at Lexington and Concord, they sent the Olive Branch Petition written by John Dickinson, which asked King George III for a do-over and a chance at peace. This de facto government was instrumental in providing funds and developing a war strategy that would ultimately help the colonists gain independence from England. They ratified the Declaration of Independence written by Thomas Jefferson on July 4, 1776, signaling the start of the American Revolution. In January 1776, Thomas Paine published his pamphlet Common Sense, exhorting Americans to rise in opposition to the British government and establish a new government based on Enlightenment ideals. Many people believe Thomas Paine's Common Sense jump-started the American Revolution. Thomas Paine was one of the first people to publicly call for the separation from England.
The Declaration of Independence, written by Thomas Jefferson and adopted by the Second Continental Congress on July 4, 1776, announced that the American colonies regarded themselves as 13 newly independent sovereign states and no longer a part of the British Empire. This document was heavily influenced by a book called Common Sense and the Philosophy of John Locke.
And so began the American Revolutionary War.